Dragons in a Bag. Zetta, Elliott. Chapter 2. I step inside the dark apartment. Lock the door, boy, my grandma growls. I look at the 3 locks on the door and decide to just slip the one closest to the knob in case I have to make a quick exit. Then I let my eyes adjust to the shadows before searching for my grandmother. The apartment smells musty, but it looks tidy. The living room has 2 big windows with heavy curtains that shut out the spring sunshine. I shrug off my book bag and set it down by the door. I figure if things don't work out here, I can always run away and hope the Patels will take me in. I am standing in what must be the dining room. There's a short hallway to my right, and I think my grandmother's voice came from that direction. Light spills into the hallway, and a moment later, I hear pots and pans clanging. I figure my grandmother must be getting ready to cook something, so I move over to the kitchen and stand in the doorway. My grandmother is wearing a purple velour housecoat that clashes with the orange and green wallpaper in the kitchen. The housecoat must be old because the fabric is worn thin at the elbows and around the butt area. I'm guessing my grandmother sits a lot. Though I didn't see a television in the living room, right now she's standing at the sink, peering into a cupboard that looks pretty empty. "You hungry?" she asks in a gruff voice. "No, ma'am," I reply. "Boys are always hungry," she mutters before taking a jar of peanut butter off the shelf. I watch as she grabs the knife from the dish rack and a loaf of bread from on top of the fridge. It looks like I'm getting a sandwich whether I want one or not. Her white hair shrudders like an angry cloud as she smears peanut butter onto the bread, all the while mumbling to herself. I'm pretty sure she's talking about me, but her voice isn't quite loud enough for me to hear. So I figure she's not actually talking to me. I stare at the worn patch on the back of my grandmother's housecoat and wonder what her face is like. She hasn't looked at me yet, so I guess she's not curious about my face. I wonder if we look alike. Folks always tell me I look just like my mother. We have the same dark eyes, long eyelashes, and curly eyebrows that creep across our face like twin caterpillars. There's a box on the kitchen table that looks like it just came in the mail. It's about half the size of a shoebox and a lot of colorful stamps surrounding my grandmother's address. But there's no name written on the box and no return address that I can see. I go over to the table to get a better look. I slip onto one of the chairs and examine the stamps. Most of them show birds and butterflies, but others have dinosaurs and lemurs on them. "Where did this box come from?" I ask. My grandmother grunts and says, "Far, far away." She pauses, glances at me over her shoulder and asks, "I have an old friend in Madagascar. You know where that is?" I don't look up, but I can feel her eyes on me. Something tells me this is a test. Luckily, I know the answer. "It's an island off the coast of Africa," I reply. She puts down the knife and for the first time turns to look at me. I'm not sure what she sees, but when I look into my grandmother's face, I see an ordinary old woman who doesn't look anything like me or my mother. In fact, her eyes are a murky blue-black color, and she doesn't have any eyebrows at all. She squinches up her face and says, "Boy, what you know about Africa?" I wonder what she wants me to say. Geography is one of my specialties. I sift through all the facts in my head and say, Africa's a continent. There are more countries in Africa than there are states in the Union. Madagascar in the southern Africa off the coast of Mozambique. She folds her arms across her chest and her elbows nearly poke through her velour housecoat. "Well, well, well," she says in a voice that lets me know she's impressed. I stare at the box so my grandmother won't see that I'm annoyed. People never expect a kid like me to know anything about anything. I'm used to it, but it still bothers me sometimes. My grandmother turns back around and finishes making the sandwich. "Your mother teach you about Africa?" I shake my head, but then realize my grandmother can't see me. So I say, "No, ma'am, I taught myself." Then I add, "There's a lot of rare animal species that live on Madagascar." "Ain't that the truth?" she replies in a short laugh. For the first time today, I start to relax. Maybe we do have something in common after all. I reach out my hand and turn the box so I can check the stamps on the other side. To my surprise, the box jumps. My mouth falls open, but I hide my surprise when my grandmother turns around and brings the sandwich over to the table. She sets the plate down and then eases herself onto a chair. Eat, she says before shoving the plate closer to me. I'm not really hungry, but I figure it's probably easier to just do as I'm told. I take half the peanut butter sandwich off the plate and keep my eyes on the box. The peanut butter is thick, and it takes a lot of time for me to swallow just one bite. I glance over at my grandmother and see in her eyes that she's laughing at me. You need a beer to wash that down, she says. Why don't you grab a bottle from the fridge? Beer? I'm only 9 years old. I figure I'll just see what's inside the fridge and pour myself a glass of milk instead. I push back my chair and take 3 steps across the kitchen. I have to tug hard to open the fridge door, and the only thing inside is a head of winkling cabbage and a 6-pack of root beer. Want one, I ask her. Sure, she says. Why not? I grab 2 bottles and close the fridge door. That's when I notice that the box has moved from the kitchen table to the counter. I didn't hear my grandmother make a sound, but the box is definitely out of reach now. I set 1 bottle of beer in front of my grandmother, and I watch as she twists off the cap before taking a swig. She says, once she swallowed, nothing like a cold beer first thing in the morning. The clock on the wall reads 11:20, but I don't tell my grandmother that. I just sit down and open my own bottle of root beer. I take a small sip and watch the box on the counter. I think I can see it move a fraction of an inch, but maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. Maybe my grandmother just moved the box so I wouldn't get any peanut butter on it. Or maybe she doesn't want me to know what's inside. I feel my grandmother watching me, so I look down at my sandwich instead. I force myself to pick up and take another bite. Not hungry, she asks. When I shake my head, she helps herself to the other half of my sandwich. With her mouth full, she asks, You like to read, boy? I nod and she continues, Good. I got plenty of books, no TV. But you can read any book that's in this apartment. We don't have a TV either, I tell her, happy to have discovered another thing we have in common. Oh, yeah, she replies. I guess your mama didn't forget everything I taught her. I glance at the box again. This time, I'm sure I see it move. My grandmother gets up suddenly and puts the lid back on the jar of peanut butter before returning it to the cupboard. She slams the door shut and says, I need to make a phone call. When you're finished eating, just go to the living room and find yourself a book. Understand? Yes, ma'am. And quit calling me ma'am, she snaps. It's getting on my nerves. Sorry, Grandma. I don't know if it's the peanut butter or the strangeness of that word that almost makes me choke. I take a quick sip of root beer and look up to see my grandmother's shocked face staring at me. Boy, I ain't your granny. Now it's my turn to look shocked. You're not? I stammer. Did Mama run off and leave me with a total stranger? Well, what should I call you then, I ask. She grunts and pushes her chair in. What everyone else calls me, Ma. Then the woman who is not my grandmother shuffles out the kitchen, leaving me alone with the mysterious box.